If you don't know me, then you must be here at Tyler's invitation. And I own Fix Your Funnel with my brother Trent. We've been using Infusionsoft since 2006. Huge fans of it and the power of it when used properly. And we, of course, extend functionality with texting and calling and some other tools. So Tyler was an early um, incentivizer for us to actually build out Fix Your Funnel to what it is today with his early work in texting. So Tyler's the pioneer in the Infusionsoft community for texting. Okay. I want to start with common complaints and concerns. And normally, I don't know about you, Tyler, but when I hear the word complaint, it kind of has a negative connotation to it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Someone that's
Are
a
these
complainer.
complaints and concerns about Infusionsoft or just business in general, or
No,
what?
about webinars. We're going to keep it
Okay,
restricted to webinars.
webinars. Okay, great.
Yeah. Because that's the topic today. So we're going to talk about webinars, but there's some common complaints and concerns that come up, and I think it's okay to voice those as long as we get down to the root of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to start here because before we can talk about solutions, we really have to understand what is it that we're trying to address. And I think at the very top of the funnel, sort of the flow for a webinar would be registration rate. So most people are asking, how can I get more people to register? Would you agree with that, Tyler?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure the next one is going to be like attendance rate, but those are the two big things that we hear all the time. Like, oh, I've been doing this webinar and no one's signing up for it. Or I used to get, half the people to show up. Now only 20% of the people show up or whatever. Right.
Yeah. So I think those are two of the big ones people think about. And then the other one kind of goes without saying, but we're going to say it, which is the closing rate. How can I get more people to buy? And I think any complaint or concern that we have around a webinar falls into these three buckets in some way. And people have, and I'm not the first one to raise the questions. You're not the first one to raise the questions. Everybody that's run a webinar has had these questions come up. It's, and how they focus on them may vary, but these questions come up for everybody. And so people have thought of fixes to these problems. And the thing that I want to bring up at the very beginning here is that what most people do to fix these problems creates marginal improvements. Okay. And as an illustration, here's a sheet of paper with a margin. The gray is the margin. We talk about marginal improvements. We could almost say incremental improvements. They're small, they're tiny. They can have some sort of impact on the bottom line. So we're very grateful for those improvements. But because of the way that the fixes are applied, and we'll get into looking at what are these different fixes to these three core problems, and do they actually address the core problem? But if we actually do it right, by the end of this training, you should have an idea on how to make this kind of improvement. So not just marginal, but we're changing the whole size of the paper, right? We're going to make a huge difference in the outcome if we do this right. And so you want to make sure that you're not falling into the trap that a lot of people do where they fix the wrong things. And so they only get small improvements because they haven't addressed the core. When we address the core, we should expect huge results. If we don't see a doubling of outcome, then we haven't really hit the real problem. That's been my experience. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, Tyler, with all the work that you've done. But if we just
I'm real interested to see how you're going to make that kind of improvement, because I think we've done a lot of work with people to make some more of those incremental improvements, and sometimes it's a little bit more than incremental improvement.
sure.
But I'm curious. You got my
Okay, good. Well, that's where you're exactly where I want you to be at this moment, and hopefully everybody else is in the same place. Okay. Someone can't see the full screen. Hopefully you can help them out with that, Jaden. Okay, so get more to register. Let's look at what we commonly do to try and fix this problem. Some people I've seen will reduce the amount of information they ask. Have you seen that, Tyler? I know that's probably not the direction you go, but
Yeah, no, usually we're not dealing with that level of things. Like if they're not registering, usually we're looking at like, what's the offer, what's the copy,
oh, good.
that kind of stuff.
I've
Yeah.
seen people also try and address this by getting better landing page software. Have you ever seen people do that?
That's like the most common thing. Like, oh, this thing sucks. So I'm going to get something else that has the promise of making it better.
They redesigned the landing page. Have you seen that one?
Always.
Rework the copy on the landing page.
We just talked about that one.
Yep. And then this one, which you went right to because I know you're an expert, which is make the offer more compelling.
Mm-hmm.
we'll get into looking at these a little bit in a second. What about get more to attend? I've seen people try different times. They're like, well, it must be the time of day is the problem, right? So we try different times a day. We offer more times. Well, I'll just give the webinar, this at these different times during the week. I'll do it more often. Usually that ends up at people automating the webinar because it's such a pain to give a webinar over and over again.
Right.
So people go to automate. Maybe they had a really good performance one time where they had their best closing. And so they go, ooh, I'm going to take that one, automate that one. That's smart. I don't think any of these are bad ideas, by the way. These are just all the things that people come up with. Send more reminder emails. Have you ever seen anybody do that to try and get people to attend?
That's probably the most common thing. Just send more reminders, whether they're emails or texts or whatever. It's just like, let's just remind them to death.
So that was my other one. Send reminders in different mediums.
Yeah.
So that's like a next level attempt to fix this problem. Let's look at get more to buy. I see people when they're trying to get more people to buy, obviously they're doing the other two things to get more people to attend. So hopefully the more people will buy if they can keep their closing percentage consistent. But if they want to increase their closing percentage, they'll rework the presentation. Maybe they'll go get some training on better closing techniques. You've seen that?
Mm-hmm.
They'll add deadlines.
Yeah.
They'll add bonuses. And some of them will go as far as to call shoulda bots.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure that the phrase makes sense to everybody on the surface, but I'm going to go ahead and explain shoulda bots because it's an important thing we'll bring up a little bit later. Shoulda bots are people that acted like buyers in every way except for giving you money.
Right.
Now, we're going to talk about in webinars as being a sell or a purchase event as the kind of the culmination of the webinar, but we can have webinars for a lot of different purposes. We might have webinars to get people to schedule a consultation or some sort of appointment to talk to somebody where the actual sale occurs. This is common in more more valuable sales. Like if I'm selling some sort of legal services or something like that, I may not want to try and have people just go and sign up. I might want to have a consultation be part of that decision to take them on as a client. So what we're going to talk about it always as a purchase, just for simplification of verbiage. Is that fair?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. So if you guys, hopefully you guys can do the translation as you're going through to your specific situation. If you're doing webinars to do some sort of other objective, we can call that, when I say buy or purchase, you can think of the call to action that you actually invite people to do. So these are the common ways that people try and address these limitations in the webinar and to try and improve the performance of the webinar overall. None of these are really bad, but they don't always hit on the mark. And so we're going to look at, from the very beginning, each of these three questions and try and get some sort of consensus on what is actually the problem that we're trying to solve for. And I just want to do this not as anything more than a means to make sure everybody gets through the whole thinking process, so that when we go to solutions, you'll understand why these solutions can work for you. And then hopefully that'll help you to go ahead and put them to action. Okay. So why do people register for a webinar? And I came up with two answers. Tyler, I'd love to hear your thoughts on these. But my two answers are, it appears to offer a solution to a problem they have, or it appears to help them realize a dream they have, which is really the same thing said two different ways, right? But do you see any other reason why people register for a webinar? I mean, at the core of it?
No, I was going to say they think they're going to learn something that they need to learn, that they want to learn, but that falls right into the buckets that you've already created there.
Yeah, and the reason I want to, and maybe we could go even deeper than what you and I both said here. There is some sort of outcome that they want that's important to them, and there's a hurdle preventing them from getting to it, and they think that this webinar might actually hold the key to overcoming that hurdle. Would that be probably even more descriptive?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if the marketing's done right, we talked a minute ago about tweaking the offer. If that's done right, then you've identified a pain, you've identified a solution to that pain, and you're presenting that in the registration page and the copy and whatnot. And so yeah, if you've done that right, then the person who's registering has that pain in mind. Your webinar is going to provide the solution. So yeah, I want on it.
Okay, so if we can all agree, and again, if you're just on and you want to chat in, Um, Chat in, if you think we're missing the mark on anything or we didn't cover something. But which of these common fixes actually address the reason people register? So does asking for only the email actually address the core problem of why someone registers for a webinar? Do we actually? I don't think it does. Right? That's like you mentioned before. It's kind of a handy, like, oh well, I'm not really willing to put in the work to make it more compelling, so I'll ask for less information. Better landing page software, does that make it more obvious to the person who's looking to register at the webinar that this webinar is going to solve a problem they have? Does redesigning the landing page? None of those three things do. I will say that these two do, with a caveat on the first one, which you mentioned early on, Tyler, which is first you got to make the offer more compelling, and then you can rework the copy, right? If you don't have a compelling offer, compelling reason, meaning do we really address the reason that people sign up for webinars? Is the market that we're marketing to, is that we're advertising to, is this really a problem to them? Is it a problem that they're anxious to solve? And so if we get that right, then we can obviously get more people to register. I'm not going to go through actually how you address that. I'm going to leave that to you, or I can refer you to, in our Fixed Funnel user group, I have a recent training I did on how do you actually identify what would make a compelling offer. I'll refer you to that because that was an hour-long training in and of itself, I think. So
I'll just make a quick comment on that, Ryan.
yeah.
First, people should go check out that training that you did. But second, we see that people, business owners in particular, are very hesitant to admit that their offer may not be compelling.
Yeah.
It's very easy to blame the copy. It's very easy to blame the landing page. Very easy to blame the landing page software or whatever. But the last thing to look at is the offer. And that's because when we as business owners create something, whether it's a webinar presentation or it's the actual product or whatever, it's coming from within us. It's part of us. It's like, that's my baby that I created. But I think one of the most important things as an entrepreneur is to be willing to stare yourself in the face and go, yeah, no one signed up because what I told them I was going to give them actually sucked. It's like they actually didn't see the value in it, and I need to go back to the drawing board and figure out what is it that's actually going to be valuable to them.
Yeah, and that, to your point, because we don't want to, we make too tight of a connection between us and what we put out. Mm-hmm. We're unwilling to change what we put out into the marketplace, and so we go and try and find other things that will solve the problem, that don't have to do with us, reworking what it is that we said we're about. Yep. So the software, the contractor, anything else, but let's look at that offer and make it more compelling. So if you want to have more people register for a webinar, the biggest thing that you can do is make your offer more compelling. Spend time going through the hard work. It's not too hard, is it, Tyler? I mean, you do this all the time with your clients. You help them.
I actually think it's some of the hardest work that we do as business owners is like really
create. Well, what makes it really hard though is that because what I see is people don't take the time
right
to go through the effort, because it's intimidating on its face. Once you get into it, it's actually kind of enjoyable, I found. But it's the intimidation of the whole thing. It looks scary from the outset. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people from getting into it.
There's also a laziness factor, right? It's like, oh, Joe Schmo over there did this really successful webinar. I'll just take his template or her template and replace my product. Well, it doesn't work that way, right? So
I know. And I feel bad because a lot of people get hoodwinked into that, right?
Sure.
Where people promise, hey, get my template and this will solve all your problems.
Right.
And it probably won't. Because the thing that actually is the reason that people register for webinar is, does it appear to offer a solution to a problem they have? Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to spend any more time on that, but I want to make sure that you guys get that, because that's a foundational approach mentally to solving the problems that are in your thing. Let's find out what actually will make a difference, and don't spend time on anything else except for what will make the difference. And then you'll see suddenly your results will get much better. So I would challenge people, if your registrations aren't what you'd like them to be, just evaluate your offer. Is it really compelling to the market? And obviously results will have some indication in it. So you might have to change your ad and that kind of stuff. Okay. Now, this is where I'm actually going to be helping you guys more in the training, is why do people not attend a webinar? I think that we normally would answer something along the lines of these two. People get busy or they forget. Would anybody else
I think
just,
those things are true, but
uh-huh.
they're not the root reason.
No, it's not,
I,
is it?
I think the root reason comes back to the offer, right? If the offer is super compelling, then I'm not gonna forget. That's like the most important thing on my mind. I got a pain, I got problems, and you're gonna tell me the solution. So I'm gonna get on that thing. It's gonna dominate my thoughts.
I have the chats over in the corner and I see that everybody is on the exact same page. This is a smart group. It is about importance, right? I just posed this question. Have you ever missed a movie you told a loved one you would attend? And hopefully it's rarely, if ever, right? And the question would then be, why? And you guys already gave the answer in the chat, which I'm very happy to see, which was it was important to you. So why do people not attend a webinar? It's really just not important to them. It didn't actually reach that level of the psyche where it was important to them. So which of these common fixes address the reason people attend? Is it the time? Is it the fact that it's automated? Yeah, we'd have to say none of them. It's not none of that. The problem is it wasn't perceived as really important. Now, what's fascinating is that when the person registered for the webinar, that was what we call the height of interest, right? The moment of registration is the height of interest. That is where the person is most interested, where it's most important for them to attend. From that moment forward, it declines. And if you want to know how quickly it declines, let's look at this in just a second. So if you don't do something to set the hook, to make it important, interest continues to decline. And the way that we know this is how many of us have registered for an automated webinar that was going to start in 15 minutes and we never attended? Does that ever happen to you, Tyler?
No, I generally don't attend automated webinars or register
You
at
don't
all.
even register for them, huh?
No, I'm like, oh, that's automated. No thanks. Yeah, I just don't do it.
Okay, I've registered for a bunch of automated webinars that were going to start in 15 minutes, and then something else came up, and the hook was never really set.
Right.
You get what that means because you're a fisherman as well as a surfer, right?
Yeah, I
What
do
it
more
means to set
surfing
the
than I
hook.
do fishing, but yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah, I'm not a fisherman, but Trina is. So, yeah, setting the hook is when you actually get that hook to go into the flesh of the fish so that it doesn't come loose. And most of us, with our approaches of trying to get people to attend, we never set the hook. So we're going to talk about how to do that. But this is a really important concept to understand. If you understand that the only reason people attend or don't attend is the level of importance reached inside their own brain, then you would put all your focus on how do we make that happen. Okay. So let's go to the last one. Why do people not buy? Is it because they're not interested? What do you guys think? Go ahead and chat in. What do you think? Do people not buy? So, and we're talking now about people that have attended the webinar, right? They stayed on the webinar for a whole hour or whatever the length of time is, and they're not interested. Okay, we got some good answers. Let's read one of these. They don't trust us to solve their problem. Okay, we'll think about that one.
I think oftentimes they have unresolved questions,
Okay,
concerns.
unresolved questions. Sometimes the tool seems too difficult to use and there's no training for it, a lack of urgency. Okay. Don't want too many tools. So I guess we have people that are selling tools or they're thinking about that perspective. What we have discovered is that a question or a concern about your call to action is what prevents most people from not buying. So yeah, outcome isn't clear. All of your answers are actually correct. There's some sort of concern or some sort of question. Tyler, you mentioned a question or concern or questions. What we actually discover is that there's not multiple questions for most people that they end up buying when they're given the opportunity to express that question. There's one question or one concern for probably 90% of the people that end up buying. that didn't buy before. Okay. They don't feel comfortable asking in the webinar environment. We've got a lot of entrepreneurs on ours, and marketers, and entrepreneurs and marketers have there's one thing that's not a problem for them. That is asking questions and making comments, right? So I would never worry about that in this particular situation. But in your webinars, when you're selling, the people that are shoulda bots that did everything that a buyer did except for buy usually just don't feel comfortable in the webinar environment asking a question or expressing a concern. So which of the common fixes addresses why people don't buy? Now, I'll be fair, because I was going to say this is not true, but reworking the presentation, maybe your presentation sucks real bad. But what I'm going off is an assumption that we have a webinar that is selling at some acceptable percentage. This is usually the situation we find people in, right? And I think it does, in a large part, come back to, especially looking at the comments and probably your thoughts as well, Tyler, but it does come back to how well did we actually address the core problem of the market, right? And how well did we explain how we can create a solution to that core problem? My experience has been that if you can first really show that you understand the problem even better than they do, they're more likely to hear you on your solution. Right, if you can address all the underlying assumptions that cause people to do the wrong things and not the things that you're going to recommend that they do.
Just like we talked about with the registration process, it ultimately comes down to the offer, right? And all the things you just said are essentially pieces of the offer. And it's the offer and the level of risk they feel, right? So if you haven't convinced them with the offer and you haven't given them a way to feel like they're not totally at risk by taking you up on the offer, then they're not going to buy.
So maybe reworking the presentation could help some of those things if it wasn't great. But what I'm going to show you guys today is that there's actually mechanical things that we can do. Obviously, if you can improve the value of your offer to the marketplace by making it more compelling, that's going to raise everything and make it better. But these mechanics I'll end up showing you that do in some ways address these core issues have doubled people's outcomes for webinars. And so we're going to show you all these things. But my belief is that while all these things do have some contribution, they're marginal. Getting the offer right is probably the only one that is a big one. We already circled that at the beginning. But when it comes to actually your presentation, usually that's not the big problem. Okay. Okay, so somebody said they had a question which was not answered, and so they didn't buy. And they did wrap around that they didn't trust this product could help them. Just another shiny object. So sometimes that's true too. Sometimes people get us with the lure, but they don't deliver with the bait, right? Have you ever seen that happen before, Tyler? I'm sure you've never seen anybody a great lure that has no bait on it whatsoever.
Absolutely. Just this week, I just told you I don't register for automated webinars, but what I did do was I kind of got hooked in on just like a video sales letter, right? Which essentially is kind of like a just-in-time webinar almost.
Yeah.
And so like the topic was interesting. I was like, okay, this is pretty compelling. I get through it. And then the offer at the end, I'm like, no, you just didn't deliver. So it got me to watch a whole bunch of video and then I just bailed.
Okay. So it's really important that we connect an actual solution to the problem, right? Yep. So that's going to be critical. So today we're going to talk about some small hinges that open big doors. We're going to do registration confirmation. I'm going to show you how to set the hook. We're going to get into specifics of how you do that. Then we're going to talk about making the choice a priority. So how do you actually influence the mind to confirm that decision to the point that it becomes important to them? And then we're going to talk about starting a conversation. And so how do we get that person to go from just looking for information to becoming a client? Okay. So the thing I'm not going to cover today, which we already mentioned at the beginning, is how to make your webinar invitation more compelling, which if you do that work properly will inform your presentation. But even if you kept everything that you currently have in your webinar the exact same from your invitation all the way through, and then you make these adjustments I'm going to talk about in the 3 we will talk about, you should see a significant increase in overall performance of the webinar. But you have to pay attention closely to all the things I'm going to say. What I've found, Tyler, is that I'll give this kind of training, I'll detail out what needs to be done, and then people will cherry pick and they don't get the results, and then they're mystified. Have you ever seen that happen?
Absolutely. You do the easy things and not the hard things. Just like we were talking before about, it's easy to blame the landing page. So I'll just get a new landing page tool. But the hard thing is, oh, I actually got to look at the offer.
So don't pass up just because I'm not covering that today. Don't pass that up, because that will be, if you do these other 3 parts I'll talk about, and then you also do the making your invitation more compelling, making your offer and solution more compelling, then you can see tripling type of results. And the reason why is because now you're actually hitting on all those core things that we identified as we went up until this point in the presentation, right? At this point in the training, you guys really have a deeper understanding of what a webinar is than most people take the time to find out. And you'll notice that none of the answers were a real surprise to you either. We just don't take the time to identify the problem, then we're surprised that all the solutions we create don't create real results because we haven't hit the core. So the first part that we're going to talk about is setting the hook. So that happens exactly after the person registers. And you remember what registration is? It is the peak of interest. After that, it's all downhill if we don't do something about it. So we want to make sure we set the hook immediately. So in our registration confirmation, the first thing is, do not assume they understand why it's so critical for them to attend. This is what most people do, is they assume, okay, they got it. They read it on the landing page or the squeeze page. They registered. They obviously get it now. Don't assume that at all. What happened was they saw one bullet point on there that was interesting enough that they were willing to give you some information. That is not an understanding of why they need to show up. Okay. This is like the little, mirror thing that's on that lure that sparkles and gets the attention of the fish. Just because we got their attention doesn't mean that the hook is set. So we got to set the hook. Setting the hook, here, I'll go back a step because I don't want to get ahead of myself. Setting the hook is reinforcing the reasons why they should be attending. Okay. Setting the hook is making sure that we call to their mind. There's part of the brain called it's not even a part of the physical brain, it's the psyche, called the reticular activator. Have you heard this, Tyler? You have. The reticular activator, for those that are not familiar with it, is that part of the brain that once it becomes aware of something, really becomes aware of it, then sees it everywhere. It's looking for it. It turns, because all the time your brain is deleting a ton of information it's getting. There are noises going on in the background. There's things all around you that your eyes are picking up on, and most of it is being deleted from your conscious mind. It may be stored somewhere, but it's being deleted from your conscious mind. And so what the brain does in order for it to be able to focus on those things that are actually important is once it detects and assigns some level of importance to something, then it starts seeing it everywhere. It becomes hyper aware of it. So most people relate with this when it comes to buying a car. If you get interested in a particular brand of car, but once you get interested and you start looking for it, you start seeing it everywhere, right? Everybody's got one now. You can't turn without finding that car somewhere. Anything that you become interested in, your brain starts turning on filters that allow that information to suddenly become to your conscious mind that in the past just filtered into the unconscious. So we want to set the hook. We really want to heighten their awareness of the reasons why they must attend this webinar. And what most people do when they send the confirmation is they tell them the time and when to attend. They fail to reinforce the reasons why they want to be there. The other thing we want to do with the registration confirmation is it is a reason to collect the mobile phone number. I'm going to text you immediately the instructions on how to join the webinar so it doesn't get lost in your email. Now we have a reason to get the mobile phone number, and I'll show you why getting the mobile phone number is so important, but it also shows up right here. It's really probably most important for the third thing we're going to talk about, but if we use it right here, now it's a reason to collect it. So when someone registers for a training, I'll send them a text immediately that has bullet points of all the reasons that they should be attending. Okay, so we're reinforcing the reason why. We're really trying to make sure, yeah, they saw it on the landing page. We're going to take the best ones on that landing page and we're going to put those in the text message. Okay. Now you can only really do this in the US and Canada. So if you're outside the US and Canada, I'm sorry. And the reason why is because your text message is limited to 160 characters. So you could do it, but it could end up being a little expensive. If you do it in the United States and Canada, what we're going to do is we're going to attach an image that has those bullet points on it or some sort of other image to capture their attention. We'll attach a V card for another reason, which is just to have all of our contact information available to them on their phone, which we're going to hope maybe they'll install. So it'll help us with some other things down the road. But the reason we're attaching those media is you can attach up to 10 media to a text message. I wouldn't recommend that, but an image and a V card is great because when you do attach media to a text message, it becomes what's known as an MMS. And now it can be 10 times as long for the same price as one, basically. It's a penny more usually. And so what happens with Fix Your Funnel, it's a penny more, is now I've got 1,600 characters to restate when, how to join, and why to join, okay? So I can tell them, okay, hey, great, thanks for registering for the Webinar Profit Maximizer training. It's gonna be Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific. By the way, here's 5 reasons you should show up because you don't wanna miss this, boom, 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 boom. And then maybe even ask a question. I like to ask a question, but if you wanna go really effective, you'll do a pre-webinar assessment. Hey, take this quick assessment before you join. Now, I didn't do all of these things with this training because I'm not selling anything. If I was selling something, I would definitely have done all that. But I did use a few of them. I did do the text message confirmation. I did do the restating, the bullet points. I just didn't do the assessment. I did do a mobile survey to let you know about other trainings so you could just one-click register for those. But what I would do if I was selling in a webinar is I would do the pre-webinar assessment, which is a survey where I'm asking them questions to, again, set their psyche on fire. I want to get their mind thinking about the topic of the webinar. And one of the things that most people don't know is that the best way to get the brain working is to ask a question. So if I ask you a question, Tyler, and I expect an answer, that turns on a part of your brain that isn't activated if I just tell you something. Have you noticed that?
Absolutely. That's why questions are so effective in marketing.
Yeah. So in the pre-webinar assessment, and with Fix Your Funnel, we use our mobile surveys. I'm going to ask multiple choice questions. My first question I'm going to use as a segmenter. I use the first question to simply determine, what classification do they fall in? In most every business I've ever encountered, there's usually a few groups of people that are interested in the business. And so that first question, the assessment, is going to be used to help me kind of filter and segment them into different groups so that I could potentially, if I wanted to, tailor my conversation more to their specific needs, right? So I might ask a question that was around, why are you joining the webinar today? And then give them 3 or 4 reasons I know would be common reasons, okay? That's going to help them to, as soon as they answer, because what's going to happen is they evaluate those answers you provided for them. They're having to go through a process inside their brain where they're thinking, okay, which one of these is most true for me? And that evaluation, what we're doing is we're kind of hijacking their brain in a sense because we're taking advantage of the way the brain works to get them to activate the reticular activator on the particular topic of our thing. So what's going to happen is they're going to start seeing this everywhere, okay? And so we want to make sure that we use that in the first question. I like to go about 6 questions max. I've heard some people go up to 9, but I like to go around 6. So that's what I always recommend. The next 5 questions, I should ask questions that cause them just to think in a sense. Now, I don't want to break anybody's brain within assessment because then they won't go through it. They got to complete it. That's important. But I do want to ask some sort of question that will get them to think about the topic of the webinar. So I'd want to ask questions that were around my topic of the webinar that might highlight the problems that they're facing, because when someone is very aware of their problems and the impact that's having on them, they're more likely to find it important to resolve the problem. So if we did the hard work or the important work that Tyler mentioned at the beginning of making a compelling offer, in the process of doing that, we're going to discover a lot about what are those highlights that we need to point at and question about during the pre-webinar assessment. Now, if you couch it as an assessment versus a survey, the benefit is that that assessment should tell you something about their current state in relation to the problem. So you want to be thinking about that too as you come up with your questions. Okay. So that whole process of the pre-webinar assessment is designed to set the hook. I mean, the bullet points help, but what will really set the hook is the pre-webinar assessment. And so you use the fixture funnel obviously using a fixture funnel to text out the link, but then we're going to link them to a mobile survey that is applying tags based as they go through and answer those questions. But what we really care about is that first one segments, and the other 5 get them to think about the topic so that it becomes important to them. Tyler, does any of this make sense into why this might make a significant difference in your overall sales if you can set the hook?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we've done in the past, and it's not nearly as effective as this, is we've sent people the slides for the presentation, but with a lot of the words blanked out. So it's like, hey, print this
So
out.
you're using
Like,
curiosity.
yeah, so they can look at it and go like, oh yeah, I really want to know that. I want to be there ready with this printed out, fill in the blank. But this can be much more effective at setting the hook right at the moment of registration. I like it. I haven't done that before. I'm gonna try that out.
So what's really great about this too, Tyler, is because we're using text. Now, you could do some of this through email. The problem is visibility.
Mm-hmm.
We all know, we don't have to joke with ourselves. We all know that email doesn't get the visibility that text message does, which is why text message can be so powerful. Now, we shouldn't replace email with text message because that would be counterproductive. Email still has a place in our funnels. But what happens here is as soon as they're registering, we process that registration, we send that text, they're going to see that. And as they see it, and if we structure it properly, when they interact with it, they get to the end, they tap that link. This is a slippery slope type effect. It's all mobile. It's very fast. The whole process is very fluid. And because of that, we get some great results for them. And so because they're able to go through that survey quickly, they just do it. Whereas if they had to go into the email, they're going to get distracted by other things because they're not getting a push notification usually for your email that just came from your marketing CRM. That text, though, does get a push notification. So they just did it. It pops up. It's top of mind. And if we do it right, then boom, they're in there and they're sliding down through this whole process and they've taken the assessment. And now we've finally set the hook. Okay. If you do this part, guaranteed you're going to have more sales at the end. Does anybody doubt that? If you doubt that, go ahead and chat in. I doubt it, Ryan. And then tell me why you doubt it, because then we can address it, because I don't want to leave anybody behind. If you have lingering doubts about this, please chat them in. Don't be afraid. I will not belittle you in any way because doubts are good. We need to clarify those, make sure we take care of all of them so that you will actually do this stuff and then benefit from it. Okay. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any yet, but if anybody does have a concern or a doubt that comes up, please express it. I doubt I can do it. Okay, well, that's a good doubt. I'm glad that you have that one because that one I can address. Okay. If you struggle at all, do this. Go to fixyourfunnel.com or I'm going to give you a phone number at the end of the presentation. Just text in and say, hey, I need a strategy session with Ryan. I will not charge you for it. You do all your homework before, and you get if you will do some of the thinking before about, well, here's what my compelling problem is that I'm solving, and here's how we're solving it. And you come with that, I'll help you work through it because it'll just take minutes for someone like me to go through it with you. We'll get those answers, and then my support team will help you do the technical work of getting the survey organized, and then you can go. So if that's your only doubt, that's the best doubt you can have because we can definitely resolve that one. So I'm glad you brought that up. Okay? So someone asked the question, are you likely to have less attendees because the barrier of entry is pretty high with the assessment? The assessment is not required in order for them to be registered. The assessment is post-registration. This is registration confirmation. So on the front side of the registration, we're just, the things we really need to do is the things that we need to sell, right? So we do need to get the mobile phone number. We need the name. We need the email address. That's all we're asking for them to register. On the registration confirmation, we're trying to set the hook. The bullet points, we're trying to do the bullet points or an infographic if you're attaching media. That's to try and set the hook there. The ultimate setting of the hook happens in the pre-webinar assessment. If we don't get them to take that, that tells us something about the level of interest at the moment of registration, more than it does anything else. I was surprised because I did experimentation on this. I asked questions and invited assessment. And what I found is we get about 85% of the people that will go through the assessment that text in for a registration like this. And so what happens is you get most of the people because they're at the peak of interest. Now, if you required that for them to get in, yeah, you could reduce your overall registration, which may or may not be a big deal since you guys already know. I mean, what are you hearing these days, Tyler, for actual show up rates?
Oh, I mean, it used to be pretty common that it was like 40, 50%, but now it's like 20 to 30% maybe for
Yeah,
those
so
doing really well.
see, here's where people get a little bit uptight about some of these things is they're like, well, if anything looks like it's going to cause friction, I don't want it to be there. What you don't understand is you're losing 80% of the people right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
So if you lost 10, 20%, but you set the hook on the other 80%, guess what? Overall, you win by double or triple. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that, but we're not even adding that level of hurdle here because most of you guys are using a web form or something like that. You're collecting name, email, phone number, giving them a good reason to give the phone number, reminder text, a confirmation message, that kind of stuff. That's great. People are already doing that all over the place. And so if you got if you got those people now to come through and then you go to set the hook with this text message I'm talking about here, and then if you get any of those to go through the pre-webinar assessment, at this point we've got their brain so tuned into the problem and so aware of why it's important for them to resolve that we just heighten the possibility of them showing up to a degree that we've never seen before, probably in our experience with webinars. Okay, so that's why this is so critical. You've got to get the phone number. Don't get squeamish about getting the mobile phone number. And at the end, I'm going to give you guys 3 ways that you can get the mobile phone number
Hey, Ryan.
in your web forms. Yeah.
Ryan, just a thought. Some of these comments, you know, there's some concern around the webinar assessment, right? The pre-webinar assessment. Like, I'm not sure if I'm creative enough. This will be hard for me, whatever. I wonder if after this, you shared some examples with people that might help them kind of just break it down in their own minds. Cause I think they might be overthinking a little bit. They might be thinking they have to come up with some like creative quiz. This isn't a quiz. This isn't like, you know, you have to make something really enticing. You're asking some pointed questions here to get them thinking about the problem. And I think if you just gave them a couple of examples, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad that you called that out. And just so you guys can start letting your brain calm down on that right now, think about questions you might ask before you start selling somebody, right? So if you sat down with somebody, you start asking some questions to find out where they are, you know, so that you could be able to better help them. Those would be the kind of questions that naturally will fall into this category. So these are questions you probably already asked naturally. So don't think you have to get super creative on it. Questions you already are asking people when you sit down. So Tyler, when you sit down with a new prospective client, you probably have questions that you ask them to kind of get a feel for where they are, right?
Absolutely.
And those questions that you guys are already naturally asking, those are the best questions to use in the assessment because they're questions that you already know are going to give you important information and that will help them see why the problem is such a big deal that they need to address. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that we've set the hook. Now the confirmation of decision. See this little timer here, this clock, this clock looks kind of innocent, doesn't it, Tyler?
Yep.
But you and I both know that this clock is an evil, wicked, just diabolical little thing because what it tries to do is erase all thoughts and memories of why that person is trying to attend that webinar. So we set the hook, it'll help us because Father Time is still unkind, but it raises the interest level even higher than it was at the moment of registration. So we do almost this miracle of pushing the plane, pushing the rocket up even higher, but gravity is pulling it back down. And Father Time does the same thing. It wants to pull down that interest level. So we need to do the confirmation of decision. We need to make the choice a priority. And so this little time that we have between registration and the actual event is a critical time. And we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to make that choice into our priority. Make sure that if we set the hook well, that hook stays locked in there tight. Because life is going to compete with your webinar. We all know that. There are a million other things in every one of your prospects' lives, contrary to what we would hope. There are a million other things that are concerns for them, and all that stuff comes up. Do people, we had a comment there, do people always talk behind slides, and is there a higher conversion rate if they see you? I always talk behind slides.
I'd say it depends on if you got a face for radio or not.
Yeah, I've got a face for radio. I've got a face only a mother could love, and so that, I keep that off the screen. We don't miss, okay, we don't miss what we see as a priority. We already have gone into that. These are I probably should have pulled these out. But your obligation is to confirm the decision during the period between registration and confirmation. So I like to do a 2-week campaign based on the webinar date of mixed media to address this. The reason that I do 2 weeks is because after doing, before we started Fix Your Funnel, we did a company that used Infusionsoft called Short Sale Genius, and we did trainings. And what we discovered is that if a training was announced more than 2 weeks before, we didn't get any additional registrations than if we announced it 2 weeks before. And that was after 440 of these trainings that we did. It was very apparent that 2 weeks was the window. Most people don't plan their life further out than that for an online event, especially. Maybe a trip if they've got to get, arrange travel outside of the state or city or something like that. But ours were live presentations in the same city that the person lived in. And so the same rule applies for online. So I would just create a campaign that covers 2 weeks. As you guys know, with Infusionsoft, if you do it based off of a date, whenever they land in there, it's going to start at that point, right, Tyler?
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to worry about giving them more than what they need. If they show up the day before, they'll only get the stuff that's in that time period. So that being the case, we wanted to lay out a 2-week campaign for webinars, especially if we're doing this on a recurring basis, some sort of 2-week campaign. And in that 2 weeks, every single message that we do is around reinforcing the importance of that. So it's not just a reminder, it's a reinforcement. So all the work that you did on the registration confirmation, good news, you just pull that work forward and you work that into these different messages. So what I have done in this category is I don't send all of my bullet points out in every confirmation message or every message that goes out in between registration and the event. I spread them out because I can go a little bit deeper into each of the main reasons why people should be attending. And I just do that. So this can be a mixed media. By that, I mean, I would want to be doing texts. I would want to do the emails. And if you have the capacity, push notifications. And through those, we want to be kind of giving a little nudge of information. So these are little micro content deliveries with attached to it a reminder to attend the webinar. So if there's resources that you usually have people use during the thing, I might email out a link or email out an email with a PDF of a worksheet, for example. And then a little bit after that, I'll do a text and say, hey, I hope you saw the PDF I emailed you. If not, go find it. You're going to need that PDF. So print it out and have it with you for the webinar. Those kind of things and I really like doing those kinds of things during this making the choice of priority campaign, because I really want to get anything that's in the digital realm into the physical realm. So if I could, in my confirmation text, even have that image there and say, hey, take this image and print it out. If it was a worksheet or if it was some sort of infographic, print this out, put it next to your desk, make sure you write the name or the date on there, set an Alexa alarm, any of those kind of things that you can do that help them to get out of just the digital world into the physical world, having something that's going to remind them in some way so that, one, they don't miss it, but two, tie it into content, because as you tie it into content, you're preparing them better for the actual webinar, because the webinar we're looking at is this pivotal event where we're going to be relaying information. And I usually say this sooner, but you guys all know this, hopefully, as people in the marketing automation world. The way that we behave is based upon how we see the world. So your behavior is based on what you know and how you see things. And that behavior doesn't change unless the way you see things changes. And so in order for you to get someone to start doing business with you, we're talking about a change in their behavior. That change in behavior cannot happen unless we introduce information that changes the way they see the world first. That's the whole purpose of marketing and sales, is to change the way someone sees the world so that their behavior will change to include our business. And so as you're going through this campaign, don't just remind them, add new information that will change the way they see the world, and prepare them in a way so that that climactic event of the webinar is something they're looking forward to, they're excited about, and that they will want to attend. And then at that point, you can change the way they see the whole world. Okay. A concern came up with 2 weeks seems like a long lead time for me these days. True. So you may not, if you've got your timing down and you say it's a week or whatever, then do a week campaign. 2 weeks is what I use as a general rule, but every application has some adjustments. So don't be afraid to adjust just because I said 2 weeks. Don't think, oh crap, Ryan said 2 weeks. It's the gospel truth. I got to go 2 weeks. Now, if your experience is showing that you don't get anybody registering more than a week out, then don't worry about doing 2 weeks. Do 1 week. Okay. On that, obviously, we have a registration confirmation that went out immediately. That's the front end of it. I'd like to make that in a separate track in Infusionsoft. Tyler, you probably do the same thing, so it always gets executed immediately. And then we have a second track inside the sequence that has the time stuff. Am I getting that right, Tyler? You're more of the expert.
Yeah, absolutely. We do it on 2 separate tracks like that. Yeah.
So then you can just do your timing. If 1 week is fine, then do 1 week. Just make sure it covers the maximum time that you're going to see between when you announce that or start promoting it and when people can register in the actual event. That's all we need to really care about. But 2 weeks is like max. So I will always have a day before, and then I will have the morning of. If I'm doing text or push notification, then I'll try and squeeze that as close as I can based on the number of people I have. So if you're doing texting, you got to know that texting does have some delay from when you say to send it, and it can send, and the more people there are, the more the delay is. And so what you'll want to do if you're doing texting is know your audience size and then figure out, about how many minutes it's going to take to send that text. If we're doing push notification, we can push that up as close as you want to the actual event. Okay. 100 people, how much before? I actually figure about 10 per minute just to be on the safe side. If you're going 1,000, you need to start trying to get as many people as you can through a push notification service as opposed to text, because text has built into it delays. So those are technical issues you'll want to be working out with our team if you need help with that. There's no easy answers for any of these things, but do some of these things, you can always tilt the odds in your favor. Okay. All right. So that's it for confirmation of decision. The big deal is just don't just say, hey, show up, hey, show up, hey, show up. Add some sort of value to their life, because there's something called attention currency. And every message you send to a person, no matter what the medium, either subtracts or adds to that balance with somebody. And if you send a bunch of messages that aren't perceived as having value, you make deductions in the attention that they'll give to your messages in the future. So be careful about that. That doesn't mean don't send messages, but when you send them, add value, because if you don't, you deduct from the attention they'll give to you, and that may be the attention you need at the webinar. But if we do those other things that we talked about at the beginning, if you do the set the hook properly, chances are your value level with them is very high and their attention currency is very high. So you're probably fine, but just still be aware of that. Okay, we're towards the tail end. We're going to have to kind of rush through a little bit, I guess, if we're going to try and keep this in an hour. I want to be respectful of Tyler's time. Starting the conversation. This is done post-webinar, okay? So this is where shoulda bots really come into play. Shoulda bots are those people that attended the webinar, they stayed to the call to action, and they don't buy. So what we want to do is we want people that attend but don't act. We're going to give an acceptable time frame to act. So maybe that's an hour. Maybe it's 30 minutes. I don't know. You guys will have to look at when do people buy? When's the condensed area in which most people buy at the end of your webinar? If most of the people currently buying are buying in a half an hour window after the webinar, then I would feel safe at 45 minutes to do what I'm going to tell you to do. If most people have bought, and when I say most, we're looking at a grouping of 80% to 70, 80%. So where do the 70 to 80% that buy, what time frame do they buy? And hopefully it's in the hour range, not days. If it's in the days range, then we're just going to have to cut it shorter. I like 3 hours is the maximum I'd want to delay before I do what I'm going to tell you to do here. But hopefully we can identify that range by looking at past orders that we have. And we can see, oh, okay, most people take action within 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, okay? We're going to give time for all the normal action takers because you've resolved all their concerns. They have no questions. They have no concerns to speak of, at least none that are keeping them from taking action. We don't want to interrupt them. Let's let them go ahead and buy. But then once we've let those people go through and do what they're going to do, now we have probably as many as are buying from you. What I have found are the people that are willing to buy if they can ask one question or get one concern resolved. So that's where we should see a doubling of your sales if you just do this part right. So we're going to ask a conversation starting question. Okay. We have context. That's one of the things I love about marketing automation. We always have context, right? So if someone showed up to a webinar, now if you're using something like Fix Your Funnel Zoom bot tool, we can register somebody through Zoom, and then we can also check to see if they attended. So what we can do is we run the Zoom check bot, and it'll check to see if somebody attended. And if they attended, but they hadn't purchased, because we can use Infusionsoft obviously to facilitate that level of, picking people. Then what we're going to do is to those people, we're going to send a text that was going to start a conversation in the context of the webinar that they just attended. Okay. So that question is an open-ended question. It's a question that is going to surround this whole context that we have. And the whole point of it is to start conversations with people who are sitting on the fence with a question or concern but haven't expressed them. And then the final part is you have conversations. As far as which platform to use, I've used a lot of them. Tyler, do you have a preference on which platform you choose?
For live webinars, I love Zoom. I'm totally happy with Zoom, meets all my needs. For automated webinars, we use Easy Webinar, but I've used a bunch of different platforms there. They're all fairly similar. That's just my preferences.
Yeah, I've used GoToWebinar. I've used a couple others for the automated side. My preference is Zoom at this point.
Hey, Ryan, I apologize. I've got to run. I've got
That's fine.
2 o'clock that I got to get to right now, but
I went a little long, so I will finish up for those that want to stick around. Tyler, thank you for joining us. And
no worries. This is great. No, it's such great education. I'm glad that some of our audience was able to get on here, and I'm looking forward to the ones that you've got scheduled for the next few weeks.
Yeah, I will keep those under an hour. Okay, awesome. For this one, let's go ahead and do this final part. If you guys have questions about conversation starters, go ahead and I'll answer those. But how do we get registrations to give us the mobile number? This is a concern that a lot of people have. What I recommend is that, one, if you're going to use a mobile or just a order form and you add the mobile phone field to it, there are some things you need to watch out for. One is you're going to get some bogus numbers because some people may not trust you enough yet at that point because maybe our copy isn't clear enough. They don't have enough experience with us. So the problem with the web form is that it does lead to some people not giving you their mobile phone number. The other issue is data entry. So people typically will enter in a number in the local format. This is usually not too big of a problem in the United States and Canada because of the way that our numbers are formatted. But when you go into other countries like the UK and Australia, a locally formatted phone number is not textable by software. And so we have to make some conversions to it. So if you are going to collect a mobile phone number and you're going from more countries than just the United States or just Canada or the United States and Canada, then what you need to do is add a country code to your web form as well. And make sure that that country code is being reflected as a select because Infusionsoft needs to see it in a certain way. And we also need to see it in a certain way in order to validate your phone number. So recently, in order to address this issue in particular, we added something we call the E164 bot, which most people would think that's a stupid name, but E164 is the international phone number format. And so what that bot will do at no charge, as long as you have a country and a phone number, it will fix the format. So no matter how they type it in there, it'll get it into the right format so you can text and call them. So I have added that bot recently. I recommend that you use that bot if you're going to use a web form. It addresses most of the issues I have with web form registrations, except for if people give you bogus phone numbers. So that's one that you'll have to overcome with copy and compelling reasons for why you need the mobile phone number. So those are a couple of things. There are some more sophisticated ways. So if you do have a development team, go ahead and message us and I'll share that. I won't complicate or muddy the waters here. But there's some things you can do to actually get the phone number formatted better and makes it more likely that they'll give you a real number. The second way that you can get the registration and the mobile number is the keyword and number to register, which you guys experienced registering for this webinar. Okay, so this format has pluses and minuses too. I had a few people that Tyler told me about that said they were unable to register, which okay, I have never seen that. But here's where their concerns were. One was they didn't have a mobile phone number. Well, I'm okay with them not attending my webinar in that case because they weren't going to buy anyways. They're not, and if they're a buyer, they're not going to use it because they don't have a cell phone. So that just doesn't jive with me. So that's not really an issue. Some people are not used to doing the texting, so you may see a reduction if they're not really compelled. This goes back to the importance of having a compelling call to action. If there's a compelling call to action, they'll do what it takes, okay? So those are the only things I see as an issue for number 2. But I want to disclose those so you guys can be aware of them. Okay. The third way is use Facebook lead ads to register. This is like, I love this way if we're sourcing off of Facebook. Lead ads is the way to go. I would use lead ads over pushing people to a web page 10 days to Sunday. There's no way that I would do it any differently because Facebook lead ads are so powerful. What we gathered for one of our companies 120,000 leads through Facebook lead ads. And we did an analysis at 20,000, I think it was, when we were at 20,000 leads. And we ran all those numbers through our check number bot. And then we looked at them. And what we discovered was that 99% of the phone numbers you get through Facebook lead ads are real phone numbers. 97% of them are mobile phone numbers, meaning legit mobile phone numbers with a carrier, not like a Google Talk number, or Google Voice number, or something like that, actual mobile phone numbers. And those statistics are unheard of if you use number 1, okay? So if you use number 1, you'll never see those kind of numbers. You're gonna have higher fake numbers and improperly formatted numbers. Your mobile number will not be as high as it is for number 3. Number 2 is the best because it always gets the real mobile phone number. Sometimes it could let a Google Voice through. But for Facebook lead ads, that is the very best way. Okay, I'm going to look and see if there's any questions. Okay, Jaden, let us know that they'll be recording. So here's the number. If you have any questions that came up for you that you would like resolved, go ahead and text us at 760-621-8199. If you're on our website, you can always use our website chat as well. You can call into this number during normal business hours if you would like to talk to somebody. If you need any help, don't let that be the doubt or concern that keeps you from implementing what we've talked about. If you sell by webinar, these techniques, I can just virtually guarantee they're going to double your sales because they hit at the core of what is going on. So if your webinar is already selling, I'll put that as the caveat. If your webinar is already selling and you implement these techniques, you will see a doubling of sales. And if you don't, let me know. We'll look at it, we'll tweak it, and we'll get you on track because it's usually just a messaging issue if we're not seeing the doubling. Because if you hit these points, these are all the core issues. Hopefully you guys saw those. We went through all the work of looking at the foundational reasons that people have for not joining webinars, for not showing up, for not buying. When we understand what all the core issues are and we actually address the core issues head on, what we find is that the results are phenomenal. They're not marginal. They're whole new sheets of paper better, right? That's why we say doubling of results, is because when you hit these issues, you're actually addressing what is the reason why people don't take the actions you would like them to take. So again, if you're stuck in any way, don't be stuck. I have 3 phenomenal guys on support. We've got Jaden, we've got Tyson, and we've got Levi. And these guys are phenomenal. So if you have any questions, you bring them up to them. If they cannot answer any of the questions, if they cannot help you get the software actually set up to actually implement these what we talked about, they will get me, and we'll set up a time and we'll have a call and we'll go through it. We are totally committed to your success. So if you're trying to increase your sales in the webinar, do these. If you are one of our partners that does this for other people, let me know if you have any questions, because I would much prefer that you handled that than I did, because you can do it full time when I can't. So get these concepts working for your customers. Don't cut corners, okay? As Tyler pointed out, and we'll end on this, unless you guys have any questions, go ahead and ask your questions. But as Tyler pointed out, we talked about throughout this training some logistical, some mechanical things that you can do to be able to increase overall bottom line sales in your webinar, to maximize your profit. Just using the last one, Frank Kern doubled his sales. He got an extra $1 million in 10 months that he hadn't gotten the year before doing the same webinar, just because he added what we talked about in step 3. He didn't even do the first 2. But if you will do these mechanical things, and you'll go back and create and make sure that your offer is truly compelling, then you're going to see the best results. And we could actually anticipate seeing a tripling or quadrupling of your overall results based on where you are today, because that's where the real power comes, is if we really hit the nail on the head, we'll really get an offer that talks to the market and where they're at. And then if we can use those concepts to not only inform our landing page, our sales copy to get people registered, but also to set the hook, to confirm the decision, and then even in our presentation, modify our presentation so that it utilizes that really compelling offer. Now we're in a place where we can see phenomenal results. So I'm excited that you guys joined us today. I know that these techniques and these strategies produce real results. Are you currently using text messaging in your sales or marketing? So this is a yes/no question. The only time I'd ever want to ask a yes/no is in a survey or an assessment like this. Okay. So the good one about this is for us, the segregating one. Are they currently using? If they are, then we know we have some untraining we have to do and some retraining we have to do. If they're not, then we have a different whole set of conversations that we're going to have there. So that's why this is number 1. Do you currently use more than just email in your campaigns? Now that question is stated in that way because I'm trying to imply that it is a mistake to just have email in your campaigns. Okay, so that's an example of kind of highlighting a problem. Like, oh shoot, just email. Well, yeah, I just use email. Is that a problem? I want to highlight that because it is a problem. That is a mistake, and so I want to bring that up and make sure that they're seeing that. How long has your company been in business? This one's probably not as powerful of one. I think in the new version I was working on somewhere, I replaced that one. Are you best described as? This is just, again, this is kind of a segregating one. That's probably not that powerful. Annual revenue. Okay, do you do any outbound sales calls to leads? That one is an important one. That's a good type of question to have, because I'm implying through this one that you should be doing outbound calls to leads. So that question, and you can see how I worded some of my answers. No, I use email, videos, and on my website to convert leads. Yes, but I know I could do better. Yes, I got this part of my business nailed down. So I'm kind of corralling them into a few different answers. And the nice part about multiple choice is that corralling causes them to do a little bit more mental processing, which increases the reticular activator's activity in their business and their life and stuff like that around the topic of interest that we're talking about. Okay. Um, would you like to try the system for $1 and get $20 in credits for testing? So this question is kind of what's called the trial close, if you've ever heard of something like that. They still have to go actually do the buying just because they have that, although I could send out a text saying, here's the link or whatever like that. But these questions, um, this question and the answers kind of help people to think about the possibility of saying yes to our call to action that we want, which is to get them to start our service. So that's one that you can do too, is kind of a semi-trial close. It might be in your webinar, it might be around if you were able to discover how to solve this problem. I'm saying it very generically, you might do it more specifically. If you're able to discover this kind of problem, how quickly would you want to put it into action? Okay. So I might say, oh, immediately, oh, I can't get to it until next quarter. I don't even know when I would do this, different things. Those tell you a bunch of stuff, but it also tells them a bunch of stuff, right? So when the person says, I would do it immediately, they're creating a micro commitment within themselves. So that's also important for you to understand, is that those micro commitments can help them to be able to, again, get their mind in the right place leading up to the webinar. Okay. So that hopefully helps you to get a grasp of how we can be using an assessment to prepare them mentally for the actual showing up to the event. And the thing is always remember in the full context that our whole purpose of the whole funnel is to get people to make the buying decision at the end of the webinar. So everything we do all the way through the funnel is always considering, how does this impact them making the buying decision? So what I don't know about all of you is, where is the buying decision and what is it? And so I don't know exactly how to tell you without that information. What questions would you want to be asking that would help prime the mind for making the buying decision, or get the mind super curious about wanting to be on the event? And you guys have that information, so you want to utilize that. If when you do live sales, hopefully you've done some live sales about your event at some point, or you've at least had people on live that you could interact with. If you know what lights them up, we want to tie that into a question, right? When people discover something, you want that thing to make sure that makes its way into the assessment. Okay. All right. Well, hopefully that helps you guys. Again, put the whole thing into action. Don't put part of it, and then you'll be fine.